Hi everyone, it's great to have you around here right after lunch. Did you enjoy it? It was good, yeah. I liked it too. So we're coming to an end for the Radio Days 2024, which is sad, but still great to have some great people around here for the last couple of sessions. There will be a big finale in about an hour taking place on track 1, so feel free to join us there. We will also there see a video of yesterday's party, so we kind of figure out who was with whom doing stuff they probably should not do or should do and have fun. So please come by in track 1. And for the end, for this track here, I would like to thank the volunteers as well as the technicians being here and helping us really, doing all the questions, answering them, closing the doors, being nice and smiley. Thank you very much for that. And I would actually really love to hand over and make it short and easy to Sarah. Thank you. Come up, please.
We can all come up. Yeah. Come on up. Hi, everybody. I am not Henriette, but I'm Sarah Toporov. I'm on the Radio Days program group. I work on audience development for podcasts, and I'm really happy to be presenting this last session in track 3. If you've had a lot of sessions about radio, this is not going to be about the shouty part of radio. We're excited because we're the quieter part of radio. Not so shouty morning drive, so I think it's a nice way to finish out your Radio Days experience. And I'm very happy to be here with Andrea and Constance, and I will let you introduce yourselves. So first we have Andra Zuska, who is the Senior Vice President of Content Strategy at RTL Germany. What brings you to this stage on this topic?
I also oversee audio content at RTL Plus, which is RTL Germany's streaming platform. I'm responsible for the audiobook, podcast, and music offering, as well as the inclusion of the Gruner und Jahr G&J magazines, which is not so much of interest today because we were going to be talking audiobooks or audio mainly.
And Constance, you are the Head of Catalog Management and Strategy at Storytell, which I'm sure... who knows Storytell? Who has heard of Storytell?
Oh,
okay.
I was not expecting.
Cool. So yeah,
Swedish people.
Yeah.
People from the Nordics.
Yes.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you. So I work for Storytell. For those of you who do not know what Storytell is, it's an audiobook app that is 17 years old. Was originally created in Sweden, where it's really famous. I often say it's like as famous as IKEA there. We are also present in more than 27 countries. And on our platform, we offer mostly audiobooks. 95% of our offering is audiobooks. But we also offer a podcast. And one way or another, I think one of the first things we're going to talk about is what is podcast, what is audiobooks. And my role there is the equivalent of a head of programming in radio, from what I understand. So deciding what do we publish when, and then we have producers that create them.
And so you're coming into audio from a publishing background, yes?
Yes, yeah. I worked in publishing for 10 years, and then I worked for Audible in the UK, and now Storytell. So I've been working on audiobooks for the past 5 years now.
Great. And which universe brought you to RTL Plus and content strategy?
I've been doing content sales at WDR Media Group, which is a commercial subsidiary of WDR, which is one of the largest broadcasters in Germany, Podster, of course. And the sales of audio rights was a major part of the business we were doing. So we were basically licensing audio plays and radio plays to commercial publishing partners in the market. And I joined RTL 6 years ago in a strategy role, and then switched or combined strategy and content, and returned back to audio. Not so much selling audio anymore, buying the audio, including audio, commissioning audio.
Great, amazing. Well, it might be a little bit porous. I would love to hear from each of you kind of how you define audiobook and how you define podcast, at least within your own content offerings, because I think, we could spend 3 days debating on what all the exceptions to the rules are, but for your purposes, Constance, what is the difference between an audiobook and a podcast within the Storytell universe?
Yeah, sure. So it's a very interesting and important question, and interesting because it's constantly evolving. But so originally, an audiobook is an audio recording of a book that is printed and published. And originally, it's a very simple recording. You have one narrator, sometimes the author himself or herself, or other than that, an actor who records from A to Z, everything, there's no sound, that's it. And it's available, used to be available on cassette, on CDs, and now on streaming platform. Obviously, and as opposed to podcasts, which would be mostly accessible via RSS feed and on the internet. So the main difference is that it's based on a book for which the publisher would have acquired the audio rights from the publisher, and then an audio version exists. So that could be simple if we were to leave it at that. Obviously, because we are all creative people and because the technology has helped, now you can have audiobooks that are presented as episodes. You can have audiobooks that have more than one narrator. You can have audiobooks that have sound effects. And we have loads of things. We recently published an audio drama of 1984 that had 15 actors, and we released it in several languages at the same time. So we are basically redefining what an audiobook is, and at the same time, as I'm sure you know, podcast is redefining itself. Now podcast goes into fiction, and you have podcasts that are bundled together or released like. So basically, I think what's going to be interesting to discuss today is the difference now lie on where do you get it, so how it gets distributed, and what's the original content. Is it scripted or not? Is it published or not?
Great. And how does that differ from how you...
No, I agree with that definition. And I would like to add to that from the commercial point of view. Most of our podcasts are free and are being financed through ad sales. We have a limited offering of paid podcasts, which is usually a single episode of freely available podcast formats. And audiobooks are a premium paid proposition. So that's the main commercial difference between the two. And podcasts are being listened to because of the speaker. Some of the audiobooks are being listened to in spite of the speaker.
Yes, it's very true.
You choose a podcast because you like to listen to a certain person's point of view, or a large section of our podcast portfolio is being defined by who is speaking, not what is being spoken about. And it's perhaps sort of a philosophical answer to that question, but I think it applies to a large slice of both audiobooks and podcasts.
Yes, amazing. Yeah, I've never thought of it that way, but yeah, no. I can see how that would be.
It's very true when you say like in spite of. Because like at Storytell, we find that 9 times out of 10, the reason why people stop listening to an audiobook is because they didn't like the narrator. The voice. So obviously the voice is very important.
That's a good insight, yeah. But you touched on something that I think is kind of very core for folks in the radio industry especially, is the opportunities that audiobooks can present for radio, notably that audiobooks are traditionally paid for.
Yeah.
It's paid audio. So how does that work? So RTL Plus is a paid service?
It is both. RTL
Premium.
Plus exists in different shapes and sizes.
Mm-hmm.
You can use RTL Plus for free with a limited selection of video, or the full selection of podcast and a selection of radio. And if you upgrade to a premium subscription, you always have audiobooks in that. So, and there's a very limited offer on audiobooks which are being made available for free. So in Germany, it's mostly the production output of the podcasters, which is audio plays or radio plays. But otherwise, audiobooks are always a premium paid proposition, and it adds immense value. We know that from both the research of existing customers and research within the potential customer base, that it's something which adds to the to being prepared to pay for something. And it's audiobook. It's really a high-end part of that offering.
And I'm curious because how does a radio station go about licensing content with a publishing house? Maybe you could like use an example. I remember you mentioned that you're partnered with Random House. What does that look like in terms of like the partnership model? Because they're such different universes.
There are, and luckily for us, we are licensing as a platform. We are not licensing as a radio station. That might be super different from what we are doing. For us, the challenge with Penguin Random House really has been Those of us who know the publishing landscape and know the Penguin Random House overall strategy know that Penguin Random House does not participate in streaming models. So you won't find the Penguin Random House catalog in a proposition which is a flat fee streaming model where you pay 7, 8, 9, 14 euros and have an unlimited access to a selection of audiobooks. But we found a solution to include them nevertheless. Basically, we are mirroring the Audible model, where you have one token or one title which you can use per month. And we have included Penguin Random House in that model, while still offering a large streaming selection through our partnership with Deezer, which is a music and audio streaming platform from France. And we are partnering with them both for music and for the larger streaming catalog. So it's really a one-off. Spotify is doing that as well. We did it first. Yeah.
Congrats.
Amazing. Also, I want to make this session quite lively, so please feel free to. I think the easiest would be if you came up to this mic, if you have questions, or do we want to bring a mic around? Just go up to the mic, or she has a mic. Yeah. So let's do. Yeah, we can do questions throughout.
Okay, anyways, I'm here if anyone doesn't want to stand up.
So please raise a hand if you have any burning questions, because we could go forever, but we want to hear from you and what you want to learn. And so I can see definitely the value in basically creating more value for your platform by including audiobooks. And so folks have one token a month, and then they can choose to spend more?
Yep, that applies to the Penguin Random House catalog, which is about 7,000 or 8,000 titles in German. And then there is a selection of about 80,000 titles which are coming through a partnership with Deezer. And again, Deezer is aggregating both publishing houses and sub-aggregators such as Cebralution, which might be familiar to you sitting here. So, yeah.
Okay, and then Storytell is kind of doing the opposite, right? So you are an audiobook first platform, and you're starting to incorporate more podcasts and originals and all exclusives,
The originals are exclusive, yeah. So originally, Storytell is more like a distribution platform, a bit like you would have Netflix and everyone distributes their content. But over time, obviously, having exclusive content was one way to differentiate ourselves amongst the competitors. So Storytell are starting to become a publisher themselves, a producer themselves. So we do have a portion of content that we call Storytell Originals that are not based on books, so they are not based on any scripted content. We create the content. We have a script writer often write it, and then we produce it. So that's one of the type of content we create that, you know, kind of like shakes the boundaries of what is an audiobook, what is an audio drama. At the end of the day, it's just audio, and it's audio well produced. And then we are expanding into podcast as well in different ways. So the first way is by creating our own podcast ourselves, and there it's more like basically creating a show that is episodic. That's why we would call it a podcast. But we are also starting to distribute external podcasts. So the same way that your podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, it can become available on Storytell. And within that, we are trying to test also having them available before the paywall. So everywhere, Storytell, you have to pay. It's a subscription. Obviously, it depends of the market. What you get is either unlimited or a number of hours. You get 15 hours, 13 hours. But so far, you had no content available for free. And what we are trying to get, in a very obvious way of trying to expand our member base, is to first have some podcasts that are available for free in order for then people to be, you know, just hooked on our app and not needing to have another app to listen to everything. And this is a very limited test to one country. And I think what, you know, to be honest, what we're trying to do here is that at the moment in most countries, and you feel free to interrupt, is that the audiobook listener are different than the podcast listener. And that's why we wanted to have that session here is what are the bridges, what are the differences, and why can you start doing audiobooks and why can I start doing podcasts? So we want to try and get the podcast listener to start listening to an audiobook. And so one of the ways is to start distributing podcasts, but also to have podcast creator create content that is more similar to an audiobook to enable them to make a bridge. So there's loads of things we are doing, and obviously the sole goal is to grow our member base and to grow the company.
And I want to get into the different usages, but if we could just stick to the business model for a second, and maybe I could be a bit provocative. So I know, I know Spotify wants more people to listen to podcasts because the more people are listening to podcasts, which is a free medium, ad-supported, the less Spotify is paying for music royalties. How does that work in terms of audiobooks? Like, if people are listening to more podcasts on your platform, are you paying less to publishing houses, or?
No, we're not paying less to publishing houses. Otherwise, one of the things to understand is that the publishing world, any platform is like so reliable on the publishers. Like the publishers are like very strong, and I don't think you have that similar thing in other industries. So you cannot do anything without the publisher. And the Penguin Random House example, is a key one. It's like, when you do audiobooks, when you do publishing, you don't go and like, I want to create a value proposition. No, you go to the publisher and you're like, what can we do in order to have your content? Yeah. So it's very important. So the goal is always, to grow the audiobooks. That's our core. That's where the money is. B, that's where there's so many people that do not know what an audiobook is. So we have a lot of people to convince first.
So who is listening to audiobooks and who's listening to podcasts, and how are you trying to cross-pollinate these? Do you want to take that, Andrea?
I think we still see in the data that the customers using audiobooks tend to be slightly older than the ones who are familiar with podcasts, but this is about to change. We have seen the largest growth in the listening audience in podcast in the age group 50 plus, 60 plus. Pretty much podcasts are at the same place where video streaming has been 2 or 3 years ago, where you have a slight saturation in the younger target groups and you are expanding into the older target groups. In the audiobook sector, we see quite an opposite picture. We have a very strong listening basis in the 40 plus. The younger target groups tend to listen to kids' content. That's where audiobooks are super popular and intensely listened to. And I think really the two purposes, audiobooks and podcasts, they are not genres, they are purposes in our language. They complement each other. And what we see in the usage pattern is that we do have a lot of converts in audiobooks. If someone is used to listen to audiobooks, you have a certain, you know where to start, you know what the first chapter is. We see a lot of behavior in the data where people sort of start with the third or fourth or fifth chapter before they realize, okay, no, I have to start with the first track, because a lot of audiobooks, as you know, a lot of audiobooks are being really cut into small pieces, generating a lot of media starts. So we see customers who are not familiar with that mode and learn to use audiobooks with our product, which is exciting because we were looking exactly at that to create new audiences, to engage more audiences with audiobooks.
Very cool.
That's happening.
And I'm curious, with the growth that you're seeing in podcasting with 50 plus audiences, what categories are working the best?
True crime, as always, in podcasts. It's the same answer. We see a lot of news podcasts also performing extremely well in the elder target groups. Comedy and lifestyle, less so. That's still pretty much a domain of the younger target groups. And with audiobooks, it's also crime, but it's also traditional fiction. It's romance novels, because we have a strong female audience within the RTL Plus base. So we see romance performing really, really well.
Great. And who's listening to podcasts? Who's listening to audiobooks? And are you capturing those podcast people and serving them audiobooks?
Well, that's the goal, ultimately, definitely. I think to answer your question regarding the audience, it's a very interesting one. Obviously, differs a lot from one country to another, but also from one type of offering to another. So when you have a credit model, you don't attract the same people as when you have an unlimited streaming model, which I think is very, very interesting. Because why? Because the way you interact with the app is very different. And with the credit model, you can choose one book per month. So you tend to go for like the bestsellers, the book that you've seen everywhere in the bookshop. Whereas with the streaming model, which is what Storytell do, you can pick and choose. You can listen to as many as you want, and you can therefore listen to more of the backlist. So the curation is very important. So the audience, I think there are several facts that are very interesting and are across several countries. Is that first is much more balanced in terms of genre than the book world is. So most people who buy books are women. But like really in most countries, like 80% of book buyers are women who buy for the men in their family or the women in their family. Whereas the audiobook world, it's 50-50. But the heavy listeners are, at least for the streaming industry, are mostly women. And they are women who are in the age group that you defined in some countries a bit earlier. And the typical listener is a woman who lives in an urban area and uses audiobook to escape while she does her daily work, a daily core, goes to shopping, goes to laundry, that's what happened. You do something boring, so you listen to an audiobook to make your life a bit more exciting and to make laundry a bit more exciting. So that's the core, and these people are really heavy listeners, especially in the Nordics, but also in Germany and in the Netherlands, when we have people that listen to hundreds of hours of audiobooks every day. And then in terms of who is coming and who we're trying to capture with the podcast offering is obviously a younger audience. So far, as Andra was saying, the younger audience, obviously, because they don't own a subscription, because you have to pay. Yep. Teenagers, they cannot, they don't have necessarily a credit card to be a member. So the young content is the children of the woman who owns the subscription. It's like, take my phone and leave me alone and listen to an audiobook on repeat. That's very typical, and that is growing. So we're really trying to get, a younger audience, and that is working really well by some of the books that, are being released. Obviously, YA romance is massive, is really strong, and that's a good way to get, the TikTok romance are massive, and that's a good way to get a younger audience. Yep. And podcast as well, because they know the format, they know the host, so they are more likely to follow and to try.
And I mean, I think you did something really clever when you opened the French market. And I don't think I count anymore as the young audience, but I did not know Storytell. And you partnered with a really big podcast company in France, and you co-produced Steamy, which was erotica, which I didn't actually listen to, erotica. But I do now. Come on. Can I get a subscription?
Yes.
Can I get a free trial?
You can get a free trial.
But it was amazing brand awareness, because they were. I mean, their audience is your target audience.
Exactly. Because there are a lot of people who listen to podcasts that read a lot of books as well, but they have no idea that they have almost like a prejudice against audiobooks. A lot of my friends or people I work with, they say, no, but listening to an audiobook is not reading.
It's an alt medium.
Yeah, it's like, so. But the minute they try, they get hooked, because the beauty of an audiobook is you can make of a moment that was not a reading moment. Typically, when you have your hands busy, either because you're driving or you're doing cleaning in your house, you were not able to read before, and now you can with an audiobook, and that's amazing.
I think I became the biggest consumer of spoken word audiobooks and podcasts when I was in college, and I had a data entry job at a radio station. So.
A lot of people listen to audiobook while they work as well. And at first I was like, why is that? And, just a fun fact, like in Australia, one of the biggest audiobook companies called Bolinta was created because they were selling CDs to truck drivers. Because they were driving for hours and hours and hours, and they didn't always have radio, in like the middle of
Australia. Yeah,
exactly. So yeah.
Except ABC has very good coverage. Yes.
Sorry.
What are your burning questions, please? We could go on forever, but
no burning questions.
Go on.
One from the BBC.
Two.
Hi, my name's Claire McGinn from the BBC. Why don't publishing houses produce their own podcasts? Well, why? Because it might be easier for them than thinking of partnering with somebody else. What would be your case to say they shouldn't do it and they should work with you?
I didn't hear the beginning. Why? Who?
What? So publishing houses. So Penguin Random House. Why don't they just produce their own?
So actually, most publishing houses now produce their own audiobooks and they just distribute them on our platform. But we still have a publisher hat, and so we still acquire rights as well. So on our platform, typically 80% of the content we're just distributing, either on an exclusive or non-exclusive basis, and it comes from the publisher. They do it themselves and they distribute at our competitors as well. And then with our publisher hat, we acquire our own rights and we distribute the content.
We also cooperate with Penguin Random House in that case in co-producing podcasts. Usually co-financing, having a window on our platform, a 1 week or 2 week exclusive window for the podcast before they're being distributed by Penguin Random House on all other platforms. So there is a co-financing model.
Hi, Andrew Davies from the Australian ABC. Just curious about the crossover between talent and formats between the two. How do you see that kind of crossover between podcasts and audiobooks?
Sorry, I didn't
For
hear.
talent, like who's hosting and who's
Yeah, do you
narrating.
think, are there some narrators of audiobooks who can make the leap to, you know, hosting podcasts, for example, or the reverse?
No, definitely. I think first, it's all about the voice, obviously, and I think that's what people are interested in. So people who have a nice voice, like podcast hosts, can become very skilled narrator, book narrator. Narrating a book is not the same as hosting a podcast. Like, I don't know how familiar you are, but basically most of the time you're like sitting in a booth for like 15, 20 hours and just reading the same thing on an iPad. But yeah, there's definitely cross-function, and that's why crossover. And that's why we're really trying to get either people who write podcasts or people who host podcasts to join the audiobook world, and vice versa as well. Like in the UK, actually, Penguin Random House now, for many people, when they release a book, they release a podcast together to talk about the book and make sure the book is like in the feed, etc. So it's it's very, very similar now.
How do you see the talent puzzle?
I think one of the most important things what we look in a new podcast host, a new podcast talent, is existing reach on YouTube, on TikTok, on Instagram. Instagram being super reliable source of frequency and source of attention for new podcast formats for us. And if you have a best-selling author, they do come with an audience, and they do come with existing reach, and they do come with existing channels, both with the publishing house and with the talent or the author himself. So there you have a first box to tick if you look to create a good launch pad for a new podcast. And I think they interact always in existing fan bases, in existing reach, in awareness, basically, being brought in.
If someone is good at hosting a podcast, will they be good at reading an audiobook?
Not necessarily.
No, not necessarily.
No. Sorry. And vice versa.
Yeah.
Not
Right.
necessarily.
Okay.
No.
I suppose it all depends on formats, right? We had a question all the way at the back, I believe. Or we have a question
I think I'm
in the middle, too. Yeah, no, go for it.
Hi, I'm
please.
Stefan Müller from AER. I'm a radio guy, but my wife is a writer, and her first book is out also as an audiobook and also on Storytell. But as a consumer from audiobooks is such a great product. But I don't remember who said that the reason why you drop out of an audiobook is the reader or the actor who is in there.
Yeah.
The same reason for me, because many times you lose concentration if the reader isn't good enough.
Yeah.
Do you think the development is going to be for audiobooks that there's gonna be directors involved in order to color it up? Or I even heard audiobooks that has acting within. Some of the sequences are acted and more lively and soundscapes in it, because I think audiobooks need that development to be more successful.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your question. It's very, very interesting, and it's right what I'm working on at the moment, so I can go forever. I'll try and be quick. So first, indeed, one of the main reasons people stop is the voice. And it's not that they don't like the voice, it's that they don't like how the reader is like reading said name or said word, etc. So it's not like, oh, that voice, I don't like it. So what are we doing? First, there's already directors. Like if you have a budget, and if you do it well normally to produce an audiobook recording, you have a director, and you have an engineer, and then you have a skilled actor. That's why more often than not, we don't ask the author to read his own book, because although they often want to, they are not the best person in place. So we do have a casting, etc. So clearly that exists. It needs to exist, even more, and more people, hopefully more and more companies, as they make money, can do this investment. But we are looking at other things as well. One of the things we just recently launched at Storytell as a test, which links with the AI thing, is we launched something called the Voice Switcher, which is basically it's just for 25 titles at the moment, so it's very limited. It's a small test, but still, for these 25 books, you can switch between the original narrator and 4 AI voices. And then, we are trying to monitor and see, okay, what type of voice works better for that type of content. But now that we have this functionality, the ideal world is like we have 2 human narrators of very different style, accent, gender, experience, and you can switch depending on what you want. So again, it's how technology can help in making the experience as tailored as possible so that you want to finish the book and you want to stay. And so stay tuned.
Cool.
Thank you.
Do we still have a question in the back? I saw a hand.
Not anymore. Was answered.
Seems to be clear.
Okay.
It sounds.
Great.
Oh, good, great, amazing. I have a question. Audience measurement. So in podcasting, we are kind of beholden to the download of the RSS feed. It is very opaque. It can mean you've listened for 3 hours. It can mean you've listened for 7 seconds, but it's a download. Yeah. But you're obviously both on your own platforms, and audiobooks have very different KPIs. How do we make sense of any of this?
Basically, the one and only KPI which I rely on is time spent. Because you can't count media starts. This comes with the territory. You have audiobooks of 10-hour duration, which are being cut into 500 pieces, 500 chapters, each generating a media start. I lose all comparability if I try to compare it to the start of a podcast. So I measure time spent. And I think it's why we choose to include audiobooks in the proposition, because the reasoning behind is that the longer the subscriber spends with the product, spends with the content, the less he's inclined to churn. Yeah. The higher the stickiness of the proposition. So the time being spent is my North Star.
And we obviously also monitor that, like the finishing rate of a book, and it's data that we do share with the publisher. They have access to a dashboard, and they can see when, on average, people drop from their book. So, and then they can listen. If like everyone stops at 1 hour and a half, they can go and like see what happens at 1 hour and a half. So finishing rate is very important. We also track at Storytell first book rate. So basically, what's the first book people have listened to when they joined? And it's a good indication to see, what made them come on the platform. It's very spread because the audiobook world doesn't have the equivalent of the big series that HBO has, etc. So people come for their own interest. And then the other KPI that we track is book shelving, which is when you scroll and you just list it as like, I want to listen to it later. Okay. Because again, that shows you're most likely to stay engaged with the app and have, FOMO if you don't listen to all of this, so you're going to stick on the app. So these 3 things, I think, are a very good indication that you are either interested in potentially listening to a content, or you're being captivated by said content, and you're going to listen to the end and the follow-up.
Book shelving is my new favorite verb. Decided.
There you go. You're welcome.
Anything else? Feel free. Yes.
Yep.
Thank you. Where would you draw the line between a big audiobook production, as you mentioned it, where you're heading, and a classical radio play or audio drama?
Exactly.
Or is there a line?
Yeah. I don't think there is a line. I think we're all basically doing the same thing and calling it differently and claiming that it's brand new, to be honest with you. I know that, I was at Audible before, and when I arrived at Storytell, like they had never done an audio drama, and they were like, yeah, it's brand new. It's like, no, like, the BBC does it, Radio France does it, Audible does one a week in France, So it's just a different way to call the same thing.
Yeah.
So I think to go back, the main difference is, do people pay for it, and how does it get distributed through their ears? That's the main difference, the production itself. And that's why, sorry for the long question, but that's why actually a lot of the content that we produce ourselves, we work with radio people, we work with script writer, we work with people from the cinema industry, because that's everything is mixed now, which is very good.
Yeah. And how does that work in terms of curation, actually? So when you're presenting different content categories, are you mixing all these types of content, like audiobooks, podcasts, just trying to...
No, don't mix. We have podcasts and we have audiobooks.
Okay.
They're separate.
Okay.
It's a different animal, and different things to be found unexpected if you are in each proposition. But we do have a Hörspiele or audio play or radio play category within the audiobooks, because it is something which is being sought specifically by a certain part of the audience. So it's a sort of still a benchmark for quality for a certain type of listener. It's a smaller part of, if you look at it from the publishing world's perspective, audio plays or radio plays are being licensed and not so much being produced by the publishing houses themselves. They are basically doing readings, audiobooks, classic audiobooks. The audio plays or radio plays are usually produced by third-party producers, such as podcasters, and those are being licensed back to the publishing industry. But it's a smaller size, but still valuable because those customers are super sticky and they tend to consume a lot of audio plays.
So it's interesting because at Storytell we're trying to do the opposite actually, and to work in what we call verticals in French. I don't know how you say that in English.
That's how you say it.
Yeah, you're looking at like topics, and we're testing to see, like, if you want to read this specific author, then you don't care if she's produced a podcast, an audio drama, or an audiobook, and you're gonna listen. And the same for like the topics. If you have World War II, we try to mix everything, and so people can go from one type of content to the other. But I think what's very important is to label it very well, because to go back to your question earlier about production, although it's very fancy and very PR, it's good for PR to do a multi-production. Actually, at the end of the day, what people listen to and stay hooked on is one voice from A to Z. Like the typical book that works really well is crime or true crime. You have one, investigator through like 7 books of 8 hours each, one voice, and people binge listen. So you have to label it. You have to say if it's like a podcast or an audio drama, if it's 13 narrators or just one, if it's AI or not. Okay. But after that, you can mix and match.
We had another question around here. Did we? Must have answered it already. How are we doing? Yeah, I would say maybe, what are you excited about? Like, what's your next listen, personally?
Oh,
you can answer for on your platform and then off your platform.
That's very good. I'm always listening to, so many different things. So I've obviously had a very long list following these 2 days.
What have you bookshelved?
I forgot the name, but yesterday you hosted a panel here about LGBTQ+ podcast, and the one from England from the BBC. That sounded amazing.
Yes, Swipe Your Sign?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And then from audiobook world, I'm really excited about Good Material from Dolly Alderton, which is her latest rom-com, which has some amazing actors reading it. And that's also, very good to have like a famous actor that you like seeing on TV, and then suddenly you get them in your ear just for yourself. It's really cool. So I'm looking forward to that.
Available on Storytell then? That one?
Of course.
Of course. How about you?
Podcast-wise, I'm going to listen to all the new episodes we are going to bring out tomorrow. Specifically, a pretty explicit one called Bratwurst und Baklava. Those are 2 comedians who are really accelerating the level of their language, and they are starting their TV show at a rivaling TV station, not RTL. So it's going to be interesting tomorrow what they do in the podcast and what they do in the show. So it's going to be my pleasure. And in audiobook, I'm going to listen to Station 11. I had the book gifted. I didn't manage to read it. And I have to catch up because I'm meeting the person who gifted it to me at the weekend. So I have to listen to it.
Yes.
The audiobook version is very good. And it's
Thank you.
often the case. If you don't like it on print, it's going to work well on audio.
I liked it in print. I didn't have the time to finish it in time. So, yeah.
Perfect.
What else? Anyone else? One more, yeah? Oh. Up high. Proud question.
I would be interested in also numbers, like what is a successful niche audiobook, what is a successful mainstream audiobook and the same for podcasts in your apps?
I really struggle with the mainstream and niche categories here because, to my perspective, other than a super mainstream genre such as true crime in podcast or crime in audiobooks, I do not see the genres as niches. I think we see pretty similar levels. For a podcast which is super mainstream and super successful and is being published daily, you see performances of about 8 million downloads per month in the German market. That's a huge podcast. If you have a weekly or bi-weekly release and you have in the section of 2 to 3 million downloads, that's also really huge and super successful. And you might have niche formats in the podcast business which perform in the hundreds of thousands of downloads per month, but are still super successful because that niche is being monetized really well because it draws advertisers. True crime performs super well with the audiences, but doesn't drive advertisers because a lot of advertisers are really picky about advertise in the true crime genre. And for audiobooks, I'm really struggling to define mainstream and niche. See pretty similar numbers.
Okay, great. You have some audience figures to share?
No, I don't have some audience figure because, as you can imagine, we do not share them. I think exactly, it's worth asking. Obviously the mainstream, true crime, and romance, it's like always. It's always going to work on audio, and especially when it's unlimited streaming, because people keep on wanting more and more. For some reason, they never get enough of true crime. And then I think one of the good things with audiobooks is that there is obviously niche, but like very limited, because since you can do unlimited, you can go back and people are most likely to try, because there's not that thing of like, oh, if I try and I didn't like it, then I had paid for nothing. It's like you try, you don't like it, you go. So it's all about the curation and resurfing like small content and things that are coming back on trend or backlist titles. So actually, it's much easier to be a niche content on an audiobook platform than an other platform, for example.
Cool. I think that's all we got. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you
We're
very
done.
much.
Yes. So thank you very much for being here. If you still have questions, go up, come in front and talk to us. We're being here. And otherwise, please join us on track 1 right now and until the grande finale. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Well done.